Hey everybody, this is James P. Wagner here with Local Gems Press. I'm here with Nick Hale.
Hey James, hey everybody.
Hey, yeah, we're the publishers for Local Gems, and this is the Publishers Speakeasy. This is where we don't tell anybody, talk about questions that people have asked us about what goes on behind the scenes in publishing, or what some stuff that isn't regularly out there about publishing. These are, uh, you know, basically when we do live events all the time, we get people coming up to us and asking us a lot of things. So we kind of decided to just put it out there for, so basically we don't have to have the same conversations over and over again, but we know we will anyway. But but don't tell anybody. So this question that we have here today, I guess this is kind of like more of well, this could be a personal one, but also just a general one, and that's, as publishers, how do you know what poem to take? Which I guess they're talking about for things like our anthologies, which is primarily what we do. So yeah, and I guess that could, you could probably even expand that question because sometimes people send in, one poem, sometimes they send in three poems. So I guess that could even expand from like, how do you know which poem to take from one submitter, or, how do you know which people to take in an anthology versus, which ones not to, and all that stuff. Cause that could be like a total rejection or like a partial rejection, different ways to take that. Uh, you want to
I
kick
love
that
that
one off, Nick?
question. Yeah, I love that question.
Yeah.
So I have this magic 8 ball, and no, I'm just kidding. So for me, I look for certain things when I'm reading poetry, and I'm gonna start with if we're talking about anthologies and which poems do I take and which ones do I reject for an anthology. I mean, there's the obvious like high level stuff like did the person follow directions? Can I open this file type? Because that happens sometimes where I get it. I don't have an Apple product and people will send me in pages and I can't. James, I know you know this because it drives me nuts. This is
Yeah.
one of the things I hate the most about editing anthologies. Um, so those are the obvious things, right? And then does it fit the theme of what we're doing?
Mhm.
Does it fit the tone of what we want? So um for example, so if something's overly negative or overly political or overly let's say we're doing a publication that's meant to be sort of more family friendly and it's full of profanity as an example,
Yeah.
then I might put that one aside. But all of that obvious stuff aside, I look for is there something in the poem that jumps out to me that I really admire? So is there a display of technical skill in the way that the poem is put together, the way it flows, the rhyme and the meter, and that's I know I realize this is a lot of stuff you can't quantify, um, but that's something I look for. Is there? I like wordplay personally. Is there wordplay? But one of the things, and I know we've talked about this for years, decades even, is that like I I recognize that there's certain stuff that I like, but I think I can also I've gotten pretty good at recognizing when something is good but not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
And that's a really important skill as a publisher, I think.
Yeah, that I mean, because there's a lot of presses out there that they're very, very narrow in what it is that they publish because it's really basically just what those publishers or the editors like. Which I do think is kind of a disservice in a way. I mean, obviously there's certain styles or this that, some things might go for with niche, but it's like maybe you don't like Thai food, as somebody who eats, but you can still recognize when the thing is prepared well, and you realize other people like Thai food. So if you put too much of your own preference in there as a publisher, you're going to be really limiting, the audience that's coming to you to look at the stuff there. But yeah, I mean, there's almost like two levels to this question too, because one of them is like more the technical ancillary mechanics of picking for like specific anthologies versus like I guess personal preference. Because one of the things obviously is if we're doing a community anthology in a local area, um, say like Pennsylvania, we have anthology in Pennsylvania, we have them in a lot of different places. But obviously, if somebody from like California is sending to the Pennsylvania anthology, unless they previously lived in Pennsylvania or worked in Pennsylvania, maybe have family in Pennsylvania, like if they have no significant tie to Pennsylvania and somehow they came across and are submitting to that anthology, obviously we know not to put that one in there because it has nothing to do with what it is. This is a community anthology, and that's kind of the point of it. Same thing if we have a themed anthology where the topic is like resilience, and then somebody sends in a poem about like completely crumbling under pressure and then jumping out the window, like then that's probably not going to go very good with the theme. So there's situations like that where it's kind of pretty obvious. Then there's situations where we have like, okay, submit a poem up to 100 lines, or less each poem, and then somebody sends you the Epic of Gilgamesh, basically in terms of length. And obviously we're not going to fit that in an anthology, because then there would be, like 50 other poets, who have like, the right length of poem, and then one that's all the way like that. We wouldn't do it like that. So simple things like that, in terms of like, are they following the directions, and does this have to do with what this publication is? Those are pretty obvious. But yeah, like in terms of the personal preferences or what sticks out, like again, if it's a themed anthology, if this poem has to do with the theme, definitely a good chance of it being in there, especially if it's, coming at the theme like maybe in a unique way that not everybody else did, which is always a good thing. Or if it's, really genuine or organic, or, it comes from, a play. Like, I mean, writing for a theme is totally fine if you know that that's the thing, and sometimes it really hits really well. But sometimes people have had this poem kind of sitting there forever because this was just like where their heart was when they were writing it, and sometimes that's like a really good fit that way.
Yeah, you nailed it there. Genuine and organic, that's the most important part. Because a lot of people try to be unique and they do the same thing as everybody else.
Yeah.
But it really comes across when somebody
I
really
mean, like,
feels what they're writing.
like I
Yeah.
was at a reading not that long ago, and there was this poem called "War." Apparently war's bad. I
Oh,
had I had no idea about that until I heard this poem.
oh, you mean like flying cars?
Yeah, I mean, like, not disparaging poems talking about the horrors of war, because there's many great ones out there, and obviously it's still a relevant topic. So, of course, write it. But like, when a poem is literally like war is bad, like, oh, I never looked at it.
Well, this is the distinction
Yeah.
between, is it something that is skillfully done versus isn't it? I know we've had a couple times when, back when we did a lot more anthologies together, and I was
Mhm.
like, oh man, I really don't like this poem, but I recognize that it's good.
Yeah.
But I personally think it's boring, but I could see why a lot of people would like it.
Yeah.
And that was my argument for accepting it. Or there was another time when there was a poem that was very political, and I know because you and I, neither of us agreed with the poem itself, but we both recognized that it was really well written,
Yeah.
and it was not abrasive. It was not going to scare people away or make people feel bad about reading it. And that's another thing too. If we're talking about anthologies, is my reader going to feel bad if they read this poem?
Yeah. I mean,
Because
sometimes that might be the
yeah,
intention of the book, but it's
right, and it depends on the kind of bad. Because I felt bad when I watched Breaking Bad season one. I felt
true.
miserable through most of that season. I love that show, but that's the point, was to make you feel bad. It was supposed to be depressing because you're
Yeah.
associating with Walter's plight, and so if the poem is like that, sure. But if the poem is just telling you how horrible a person you are because you disagree with their values, that's not the right kind of feeling bad. That's
Yeah.
We can leave that out the door.
Yeah, no, definitely. It also kind of depends too. Like maybe there's a place for that type of poem in this anthology, but maybe if you've already got a bunch of poems in there that already kind of do that point, maybe like there's kind of a cap on how much of that you want to put in there, and so you might not take all of them because these three that you had beforehand kind of did that point, but maybe did it better.
Hmm.
And so you want to keep that in, and the you're looking for other angles in this anthology, because putting together the poems that kind of go together, and telling a story and all that, that's kind of like an art form in itself. And so sometimes you might reject perfectly good stuff just because you've already got enough of it in here, or, maybe that, this doesn't fit quite the theme you were going for here, or at least maybe not quite the mood, but it's still like a really good poem, which is like, sort of kind of goes to the whole other thing about being a poet or a writer in general, which is why, don't always need to take rejection personally, because sometimes it has nothing to do with how good the poem is. It's just this isn't a right fit. In fact, that's really it
Yeah.
most of the time.
It's funny you beat me to that. The idea that putting together a book of poetry, a collection of poetry, is as much an art form as writing the poems themselves. It's sort of like an album.
Mhm.
Um, Pink Floyd is a good example. Their music is meant to be listened to from start to finish. Their
Yeah.
albums are meant to be listened to, and it it's a good book of poetry is sort of like that, where you have to think about all the pieces and how they fit together. I've had a few times where people say, "I can't believe you accepted that one. I thought for sure you would have taken this other one that was so much better." I get that all the time. I love that comment
Yeah.
because it's like, well, if I was taking more than one, I might have taken both. But this one fits better with this theme or this thing, or there's something about it that struck me. There is a lot that's subjective, but at the same time, it can recognize what's good and recognize what goes together.
Yeah, definitely. And like when it comes to like, local or community anthologies, which we do a lot of them, like regional ones, One thing that always sticks out to me that I kind of always want to put into those anthologies, especially, well, I mean, our whole name, Local Gems, even though we're kind of like international now, and people are like, how do you call yourself Local Gems when you're international? It's like, because we're still
Because
focused
we're
on,
everywhere.
yeah, I know. So we're still focused on the local, but like, so if we're doing a an anthology in North Carolina or whatever, and people are submitting their poems from that, and so they're like their poem is about something that's local, like this local, like it's about like something in Raleigh or things like that, or something that has to do with like this area and it fits there. I love picking poems like that because it's like this
Yeah.
is really going to give the local flavor. And actually in Pennsylvania, I know there was this one bakery, I forget what his name was, but I know that the bakery ordered like 30 copies of this Pennsylvania anthology because one of the people in that anthology wrote a poem about that bakery and going there, and so it was like ooh, local connection, they really wanted it like that, so I mean, well, that was good because hey, from a marketing point of view, they're going to want copies, but it's also just great because if somebody happens to pick up this anthology who lives in that area, they're going to be able to relate a lot to what's going on in there. And so, when you're trying to do it on the community level, that kind of thing is really important. So if people can do that correctly, with doing that, then yeah, those poems will stand out. And I'd really want to, include those when I can.
Yeah, talk about making people feel good, or I guess it's the opposite of not making people feel bad, but people feel good when they read things and it's familiar to them. So
Yeah.
I like the local stuff too, especially when it comes to local folk stories and things like that.
Mm.
I love reading through them if it's in an area that I haven't been to as much or I'm not as familiar with the local stories, and learning a little bit about sort of the weird folklore of the area.
Yeah, definitely. And also, if somebody who's not from the area happens to get their hands on a copy of that book, then they can kind of learn a little bit about the area, through a different medium. Because every place they have like their tour guidey stuff and their brochures like that. But when somebody's reading poems about an area, you're getting much more like the personal take on it from the people who live there, and maybe not even necessarily just the cherry pick stuff that they want you to know about. Maybe you get like the darker side of something that
Well,
you know.
yeah, and I mean you hear about like traffic, for example. Yeah, but unless you've lived in Boston or DC or LA or Dallas or New York,
Mhm.
um, you might not really know traffic. And reading or listening to a poem by somebody from that area about traffic might give you a really good idea what it feels like to sit in traffic for 3 hours.
Yeah,
You know?
that is true. And just saying, I used to think that there was nowhere worse than going through New York City until I started driving down to Virginia and going through DC.
And
So
I'm
like,
sure LA is worse.
yeah. So I mean, the roads where I am on Long Island are bad enough because nobody ever expected this many people to live out here, and so it's like somewhere else. Oh, 50 miles, no big deal going that way. On Long
Yeah,
Island, it's like 12 miles. Oh crap, it's 12 miles. But
it's gonna take me 2 hours.
oh
Yeah,
yeah, especially depending on what time of
the
day.
Cross Bronx Expressway. I had the
You mean
same
you mean
thing.
you mean the Cross Bronx Delay way, but
Exactly. I had the same thing. I thought New York, there's nothing worse than New York traffic till I moved to the Dallas area, Dallas Fort Worth, and the 3 hours to go normally a 45-minute drive because all the lanes were closed and they had us driving on the shoulder. And then I moved here and I was like,
oh,
man, I miss Dallas traffic.
yeah,
Traffic is
and
awful.
for all the people in the Virginia community who know, I mean, a lot of I've complained about this to you guys before when I come down there, but coming down from New York, I pretty much always, unless I'm going at like 1 in the morning, I always hit either the New York rush hour or the DC rush hour, just because of like the 6 hour drive. Like I'm usually getting one or the other, if not both. I've had both before,
I
so
usually get both on my way up because I don't think there's any time of day where the corridor between DC and Baltimore is clear. Um, so it's like I've got 3 hours to get out of north of Baltimore, and then by the time I get to New York, it's either I'm hitting the traffic or it's like midnight.
yeah.
And if I don't get traffic in the city, it's on the LIE.
Yeah, so all those people have been
Yeah,
at our various lunches at all these places. This is what we sacrifice to come to you
this
guys.
is
All
the
the
pain.
the traffic thing and the pain. Uh, but yeah, so loving local angle for the regional stuff, definitely good. From the themes, the themed anthologies, definitely stuff that explores a theme in unique ways. Just other simple things like making sure you follow the directions definitely helps because with the number of submissions that we get for some of these projects, it's like we're if there is a reason up front that you're already giving us to throw that away, you're basically handing us a reason to throw it away, and we will because you're not following the directions.
Yeah,
But
dot your I's, cross your T's, good grammar, good spelling. Um, easy to read.
Mhm.
We knew, I know we've had some submissions where there were no line breaks, where the poet chose to use slashes to delineate line breaks instead of actually putting the line breaks in the poem.
Yeah.
That makes things difficult.
Mhm.
Or underlining when something should be or be italicized. Um, that makes things confusing. Um, Using incorrect words, and I know sometimes it's poetic license, and this is where I struggle sometimes, because sometimes I'll look at something and say, this grammar is terrible. That's the wrong homophone, or they're using there's something off, that like my former English major editor, business writing brain wants to say this is bad, but if you look at it, it could be a creative choice.
That's why nothing is harder than editing poetry, because you don't know if they screwed up because they screwed up or they screwed up on purpose.
Oh, geez, like the first anthology James ever worked on,
You know.
I sent him a poem, and some of the markup from Word got sucked into the poem, so there were
That
some
was the
brackets
second.
and
That was the
things.
second anthology.
Oh, it was. I thought it was examination that was in.
No,
Oh
that
no,
was
you're
that
right.
was
You're right.
that was
Yeah, it was
perspectives.
perspectives.
Yeah.
It was perspective. So I got the copy of the book, like maybe 9 months after it came out, because I was
Uh,
still living in Texas at the time. I'm looking at it like, what the hell is this wrong? And he said, "Well, I know your stuff is weird. I thought you did it on purpose."
yes, this is why we do proofs at this point, because obviously you need to double check, with the author or whatever. But yeah, I mean, when it comes to just deciding which poems to take, it's really just, like we say in a lot of our seminars, it's, matchmaking is most of it. It's
Yeah.
like if it fits, if it fits, there's not already too much of this exact thing, and all the directions are fine, and it's been well placed, then it's found a place, and that's pretty much it. It really helps, when the poet themselves has taken the time to make sure that, okay, this is a poem that's going to fit with this thing. Again, if like either, significant ties to a region, if it's like a local anthology, or if it's, the theme that we're actually doing. Because, we've had, some prompts or some themed anthologies where people will send something where they're like really, really, really stretching the theme to fit there, and it's just sometimes it's like, wow, you are, just Stretch Armstronging trying to make this fit, so in those cases, that's not really helpful in either case. But when it's done right, it's a lot of the time it's actually pretty easy, because you're reading the poem and you're imagining it in this book, and it's like, okay, that fits. And then there's a lot of times it's also easy in the other direction, where it's like that doesn't fit. And then there's a few that are actually like a real struggle, sometimes probably spending more time deciding than any healthy adult probably should spend time, racking their brain on that. But yeah, so that's pretty much what I think.
Yeah, and if I were to reverse engineer this question, because I think the root of the question is, how do I choose the right poems to send to anthologies or to send to publishers to make sure that I have the edge to get chosen?
Mhm.
And if that's not the case, that's sort of a related question. And I think, like you said, it's matchmaking. It's understanding not just the theme and the directions and the details of this particular publication, but if you're familiar with the publisher's body of work, and I say this all the time, like if you're interested in publishing with this particular publisher, get to know what they've already chosen.
Mhm.
Buy or read an anthology they've previously edited, or go through their library of books. What kind of authors, what kind of poets are they choosing? That's the stuff they like.
Mhm.
And if your stuff fits with that, then great. If your stuff doesn't, don't write just to please them. It's your work, not theirs.
Yeah.
Go find someone else, because there's
Yeah.
somebody out there looking for your stuff. It's just a matter of finding the right person.
Yeah. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with like writing to a theme if, the theme is a prompt and you're trying to take on that challenge. There's nothing wrong with, doing that. Sometimes we actually need ideas for doing that. But, sometimes it'll fit, and sometimes you'll write something completely different than what the theme even was. Don't like, disingenuinely contort it to fit with something like that. There
Yeah,
find somewhere that it genuinely would match for.
like the times we got those sermons in the Rhyme and Punishment anthology. Or
Yeah.
yeah,
No, there's yeah, some people definitely don't do their matchmaking skills very well,
yeah,
Matt,
it's
Matt
comedy, funny poetry. It's a comedy themed anthology, and we're getting sermons.
matchmaker to make me a match,
Yeah.
think of that in your head when sending the stuff in there, and that should probably help. So yeah, hopefully we answered that question from a lot of different angles. I think it was it's a very general, but actually a very interesting question from the different points of view that, and the different ways we could even interpret the question. So if anybody listening out there, you got questions for, the publisher Speakeasy over here, send them in. We'll let you know how in the description. Also, take a look down there. There should be 90 free poetry prompts that you could have, if you want them. But if you're going to write to them, just don't just generally contort them, like we said. But we can always use prompts. So again, I'm James,
And I'm Nick.
and we'll see you next time.